Well, Dennis, that's great, and thank you so much for kicking us off like that. Enormously appreciative of everything that Hydrogen London does, because it's terribly important, actually, to have an organisation like that at the heart of these kinds of developments. So that's terrific. Also prefigures many of the messages that will come out of today, particularly in the first white paper, which is going to be looking at the role of an integration in hydrogen in energy systems, emphasising that point that this isn't just a series of separate applications, but they need to work together. It was about 2 years ago, I think, and my colleague Paul Dodds, who coordinated that process, will correct me if I'm wrong, when we launched the first hydrogen white paper, which was on heat. You've got a triple whammy coming up today, because we've got 3 hydrogen white papers. We always intended to produce 4 during the life of the Supergen Hub. So we're going to be looking at hydrogen and energy systems first, and we're going to be looking at hydrogen and energy security, and then we've got hydrogen and the economic impacts of hydrogen on the economy. Actually, the last 2 are in the reverse order. Between the second and the third, we'll just have a 5-minute kind of stretch break. We don't want people to go far away, because we'd like the networking really to take off at the end when we've had all the sessions, so that's what the agenda says. But without more ado, I'm going to introduce the Hydrogen and Energy Systems paper. At least I'm going to introduce it. Iain Staffell from Imperial College, who was one of the lead authors, lead editors of this, and also wrote quite a bit of it, and he's going to take us through it now. I think you will have noticed that there are copies of the full reports and then extended summaries. Each extended summary has something for what we're calling a summary for policymakers, because policymakers generally find it difficult to read more than 2 pages. So there's an extended summary for those who like a little more meat but are not prepared for the full Monty, which are these rather sizable reports at the back. Iain, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, Dennis, also for setting the scene for us. I think you overstated my contribution somewhat, because yes, I was the lead editor of this paper, but really the hard work goes to all the people listed there, and of course also the difficult questions after my talk go to them. So what is this white paper? We look at the role that hydrogen and fuel cells can have in the energy system, and that's across transport, heat, industry and electricity. And we look at the technologies, their economics and the policies that are driving them. So as I say, we're a team of 10 people. There are our beautiful faces. And it's taken us a year to put this white paper together. We sent it out to expert review, and we got over 400 comments back from our experts that we worked into the paper. So it just shows you how wrong we can be first time around. So let me try and boil the 60,000 words that's in the full Monty down to just 3 bullet points for you. What are the 3 key things that I would like you to take away from my talk today? Firstly, hydrogen and fuel cells are now serious players. Now, I know that sounds like the typical hype you're always used to hearing. For about 4 decades now, hydrogen has been just around the corner, awaiting to take on the energy system. But now, fuel cells heat 180,000 homes in Japan. You've got 3 major manufacturers producing fuel cell vehicles, which you can go out and buy in the shops or lease. They can be a major part of our decarbonisation. They can be a major part of increasing air quality in urban areas, and they can do so as part of the least cost solution for the UK. Secondly, hydrogen and fuel cells, they will make the energy transition that we have to go through a lot easier. Hydrogen is like electricity in that it's versatile. You can use it to power your car, to heat your home, to balance out renewables. Don't get me wrong, we can decarbonise without hydrogen and fuel cells at all. But then we're going to miss out on the cost and the other benefits that these offer. Put most simply, if you're going to force people to decarbonise their everyday life, you would better offer them some choices in how they go about doing that. not everyone will be satisfied with a little electric car that could drive from here to Birmingham, but perhaps not from here to Manchester. Not everybody lives in a small pokey flat that's easy to heat with electric. So, the conventional tools for decarbonisation they face hurdles with the level of service that they can offer and with public acceptability. And that, I think, is a key area where hydrogen and fuel cells are different. Finally, our main conclusion is that hydrogen and fuel cells need greater policy visibility. Now, I've chosen my word carefully here. I don't want to be another lobbyist coming cap in hand asking the government for yet more money. Yes, money to stimulate deployment will bring down costs and help all around. But how about just offering a level playing field? Hydrogen technologies are neglected in many of the UK's energy policies. We discuss 26 policies that we have here in the white paper, and only one of these has an explicit mention of hydrogen and fuel cells. This skews the R&D and the commercial landscape, and it should be quite easy for us to remedy that. So, let me now whiz through the current state of affairs and see how hydrogen and fuel cells are doing in the various sectors. So, within transport, you've got fuel cell vehicles now being mass-produced by Honda, Toyota, and Hyundai. Mercedes are releasing their commercial product later this year, and all of the other big names are following suit. Yes, these are expensive compared to the alternatives. They're about $50,000 or $60,000 a vehicle at the moment, but they've got significant potential for the costs to reduce as production ramps up. And it is widely thought that the cost of hydrogen will converge with that of electric and hybrid vehicles within 10 to 15 years. And it's not just personal transport. Hydrogen vehicles are also being deployed widely in buses. As Dennis has shown, we've got them here in London. There's also a big fleet up in Aberdeen. They're being used for railways, in airports, seaports, and in warehouses. Now, how do these make the energy transition easier for us? I'd say that's simple. They pass the Jeremy Clarkson test. Driving range and refueling time for hydrogen vehicles is on par with what we expect from conventional petrol. This is particularly important for buses and heavy goods vehicles, where batteries simply can't provide the amount of energy that they require. Also important for highly utilised vehicles, such as delivery vans and taxi fleets, where a couple of hours of downtime in the middle of the day to recharge simply isn't an option. Also, I'm a cyclist. You'll be able to tell this because once I've been talking for 5 minutes, every sentence has to end with a little cough. Hydrogen has got no exhaust emissions other than water. So, the 20 new buses that TfL is ordering will have a material impact on air quality here in London. We might be able to even use hydrogen to make London's air legal again. This is something that biofuels will just not be able to contribute towards. So, moving on to heating. Fuel cell heating is now mainstream in Japan. It's advertised on TV by a large monkey. Large trials are underway in Europe. Yeah, I'm glad we're awake enough to laugh occasionally. Large trials are underway in Europe, and the best fuel cells can provide zero carbon heat, even when they're operating on today's natural gas grid. And this is because they can provide electricity as a byproduct as efficiently as our central power stations. Alternatively, conventional boilers, fireplaces, and cooking apparatus, they can all be modified to run on hydrogen. So this is going to help us decarbonise heat in 3 ways. First, our UK households are accustomed to compact and powerful heating systems. Some people may not want underfloor heating or to change the way that their home works. Secondly, hydrogen is going to be one of the only ways to decarbonise high-temperature process heat within industry. Finally, here in the UK, we were quite wedded to the idea of electrification with heat pumps. Here you see how energy demand varies over the space of a few years. And just look at the difference in gas demand between summer and winter. That difference is due to heat, and it is greater than overall electricity demand. So if we go for heat pumps, we will simply cripple the power system. Fuel cell combined heat and power actually helps with this, because your fuel cell systems will be producing electricity at exactly the times the heat pumps are consuming it, when it's coldest. Moving on to electricity, it can help in 3 ways there. So gas turbines can be modified to run on hydrogen, giving you low carbon peaking capacity, which will be very helpful for balancing out renewables. Fuel cell CHP is a controllable and distributed resource, so that can also balance the heat pumps, balance the wind and solar. Fuel cell vehicles could be used as a distributed smart resource, so they could be controlled centrally to help balance out and manage the system. Then there is power to gas, converting excess electricity into hydrogen, into synthetic natural gas, or into feedstock chemicals for industry. That could help us to integrate more renewables onto the system. And this isn't a hypothetical, maybe we need it in 2030 type of thing. It's here and now. Did you know last year Scotland sacrificed 1/6 of its wind output because it couldn't be transported to customers? Now imagine if we could make use of that wind power somehow. Now, all of this might sound great, but am I just wasting my breath? Isn't the hydrogen economy, the centralized production facilities, the massive network of pipelines digging up every road in the country, isn't that all just going to be too expensive for this to ever really materialize? And this was the chicken and egg problem that I think has plagued hydrogen and fuel cells for too long. The answer is yes, maybe that is too expensive, but it is not the only way we can do this. You can have smaller scale hydrogen production through tankers or through liquid trucks. And while those are more expensive per kilogram of hydrogen delivered, they avoid the very large and potentially high-risk investments that need to be made early on. So you can allow demand to have established and be consistent before you make the leap to the big investments. Those are also not the only way. Here in the UK, we've got an excellent electricity distribution system and the world's best gas system. So why not make use of them? You can produce hydrogen on-site refueling stations, on-site heating, converting natural gas into hydrogen. So fuel cells can operate on today's natural gas grid, and hydrogen presents various ways of decarbonising this network in the longer term. One option is to blend hydrogen into the gas grid. It's technically possible with the new plastic mains pipes that we have, but in the UK it's illegal. And you're never going to be able to squeeze more than a few % of hydrogen into the gas in terms of the energy content. So the better option would be the idea that's been tested in Leeds H21, where you take a local distribution network, maybe for a city or for a county, and you convert that 100% to hydrogen. Now, given all the diversity of decarbonisation pathways we have, a clear strategy here would really help to reduce the costs of introducing hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. One of the other things we did in the white paper, and this was Paul Dodds' work, is to extend the modelling that the Committee on Climate Change did for their 5th carbon budget. We looked at more options for using hydrogen with the UK Times model. And we found that hydrogen and fuel cells do form part of the least cost solution for decarbonising the UK. Very badly highlighted there. So in the least cost system, we are using hydrogen for at least 1/10 of our final energy consumption. It forms the lowest cost solution for decarbonising heavy goods vehicles, some sectors of industry, and peak power production. But with consistent and long-term support, you could find that up to 50% of our final energy demand is met by hydrogen, and it would have wide-ranging uses across transport, heat, industry, and electricity. Moreover, hydrogen and fuel cells offer several non-economic benefits. They can reinforce energy security, stabilizing the power system and providing us insurance against our other options failing to materialize. I'm thinking of things like CCS, bio-CCS, or heat pumps. If one of those doesn't come along, then hydrogen is there and ready to take up the slack. So one key role that policy can do is to stimulate early uptake. Technology starts out expensive. You need to drive people to deploy it, gain the manufacturing scale of economy, the costs come tumbling down. That's been, solar PV has been the poster child for this. And here is the evidence for fuel cells in Asia. What cost £80,000 12 years ago, you can now get for around 10,000. And so it's clear evidence that the costs are decreasing towards the state where they will be competitive with the other options. So policy in other countries has shown that fuel cells can work. Here we see a selection of the leading countries. Japan has had a consistent long-term support for fuel cells. It's enabled the initial deployment, lots of CHP, combined heat and power unit, lots of vehicles. And that has fostered an export industry, and their multinationals are now deploying fuel cells across Europe and America. China is strongly promoting hydrogen and fuel cells, manufacturing capacity specifically so that they can take the industry-leading position. Germany is fostering it with large trials of residential heating systems. And the US, they have 262 state-level incentives for hydrogen and fuel cells that are backed up by 8 federal-level programs. Now think back to the UK. We've got maybe 1 or 2. So one thing you can see clearly here, if we now add on the UK to this list, how are we doing in comparison to some of the leaders? Well, we're doing well for uptake of vehicles. We've got quite a good number, and we're getting the refueling infrastructure in place well. We're not doing so well in terms of the heat and power. Financial support here is very limited compared to other countries. If you look at Germany, US and China, they're supporting tens of thousands of pounds per vehicle, hundreds of thousands of pounds per refueling station to really drive home this deployment and bring up the local numbers. Now I say there's one real problem here in that most of the UK's funding has come through Europe. So that is now at risk as we're exiting the EU. So this is something perhaps we need to fight for to make sure we retain the type of funding that we were getting. One of the key problems, I feel, is that hydrogen fuel cells lack visibility in the UK. One of the early stages in Japan was to build public awareness. So who outside of this room knows, for example, that River Simple is currently crowdsourcing £1 million of funding for their next generation vehicle? Who inside this room knows that? That's excellent. A good number there. Who here knows that the world's leading power-to-gas company is British? I think we need to know these things. They need to be in the public consciousness a bit more. And fuel cells, they also, and hydrogen, also lack visibility within government. They're neglected within our policy. They feature very thinly across it. And I think levelling the playing field would help these companies to take on the leading role on the global stage that they could. But this requires focused, predictable and consistent energy policy. The UK has been very strong on technology neutrality, but that strategy seems to have changed within the new industrial strategy, where there is a clear preference to battery electric over fuel cell vehicles. However, perhaps that's a blessing, because fuel cell vehicles, they use a battery, they use an electric powertrain. So by helping one, you could help both. Frequent policy changes are undermining business and industry confidence. You hear this across the whole energy sector. The energy policy reset, the sudden cancellation of the CCS demonstration. These send the wrong signals to industry and raise risk across the board. It's not all bad news, though. The Scottish energy strategy moves in a very positive direction. and it clearly states the anticipated role that hydrogen and fuel cells have for Scotland. And there, they're capitalising on their local circumstances. They've got the oil and gas industry, a wealth of expertise that is very relevant to the transition to hydrogen, and they've got abundant renewable resources that need some way of backing them up and getting them to market. So finally, just to recap, hydrogen and fuel cells are here and they are making a material contribution to the energy system. Some people obsess about there being a killer application, but there's no one thing that hydrogen and fuel cells do. They have many roles to play, often quite subtle background roles. They will offer people more choice in how we decarbonise and how we improve our air quality. And that's going to become more important as we run out of the background solutions, changing what our power stations are doing, but with no visible change to the consumer. So, if you want to capture these benefits and foster the UK's many leading hydrogen and fuel cells companies, then at least provide us with a neutral playing field and the level of visibility that other options have within policy. So this has just been a very high-level overview of what's in the white paper. If you want the details, there's 160 pages waiting there behind you and a pile of experts who I hope will answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Iain, and I'm sure that you'll be answering a few questions as well, having, with commendable modesty, underplayed your own contribution to this paper. We now have 10 minutes for questions, particularly on this paper, and obviously I'm hoping there will be plenty. So, anybody to start? Yes, we've got a question down at the front here.
Thanks. Mike Cole from Planet Hydrogen. I wonder if you were mentioning the possibility of city-led initiatives in this country. Did you bring up the question of Leeds, which is thinking of bringing hydrogen into its gas network?
Yes, I think rather than national strategies, city-level strategies can be particularly important, especially if that's going to be one of the ways that you can convert the natural gas grid. It doesn't make so much sense converting the entire transmission system, but you can have sort of local ring-fenced areas where that city or that region is completely powered by hydrogen for their heating. Anthony, I will defer to you. Are there particular city-level policies that we address?
We haven't seen many localized activities, but there are three main areas that we have identified as very proactive in the deployment of hydrogen projects. Those were Aberdeen, Leeds, and London. But there are not, beside of those three areas, and some projects developed as well, some islands in Scotland, many other councils pushing forward towards that. However, we foresee that there is an opportunity because the role that hydrogen can play to reduce air quality emissions, and because there are many hefty fines from Europe towards this issue in the country. There is a driver for some local authorities to think about hydrogen.
Thank you very much. That's Tony Velasquez from UCL, who's one of the author team. Thanks very much, Tony. You've got the mic, so I guess you're wanting to ask a question. We've got another gentleman back there, so we'll move back after that. Keith, please.
Keith McLean from UKirk. Two points. One was where you think hydrogen in the large quantities that will be required will come from, and at what cost we can think about it. And the second one was, did you evaluate the storage benefits that hydrogen potentially brings compared to alternative solutions? Just some rough calculations I've done would suggest that replacing our current natural gas storage with hydrogen would cost about 5 billion, yet doing it with pumped storage would cost 5,000 billion, and doing it with batteries would cost 50,000 billion. So that sounds like there's a fair old benefit there, even if its supply cost might be a little bit higher.
Yeah, so as for production sources, in that sort of complex network diagram we had, you can use fossil fuels in the longer term with CCS attached. you can use biofuels, or you can use electricity. So particularly if we're going to move into a world with high renewables and potentially our government wants high nuclear as well, you're going to find there's a lot of periods of oversupply. So you could be making use of that. As for the cost of production, I could stick a finger in the air, but it's very variable depending on fuel price, carbon price, and the other things that you could be doing with that. And I believe the economics white paper talks more about the cost and the value that you can have for different forms of hydrogen. As for the storage aspect, we particularly just noted that most types of electricity or heat storage can cover you for a few hours or maybe a day or two. But particularly what you're looking at with wind, you're looking at timescales of weeks between a cyclone event hitting the UK and high wind and then low wind, and then the biggie of seasonal. And in that case, it is only chemical forms of storage where you've got these very large underground geological storage sites that are really going to be capable of balancing that. So I don't think we didn't have the sort of the back of the envelope calculations that you've done, but we do reference them. So I agree with you fully. There is a niche for batteries, there's a niche for pumped hydro, but they won't cover everything.
Okay, something else to look at in the future. We've got a gentleman there.
Hi, well, I'm Gavin Hoole. I'm from the Combustion Engineers Association. And the question I have is obviously, I don't know if anybody went to the UCL thing with the National Grid, but the National Grid is looking, developing and growing all the time. And combustion being an important part of that power generation in terms of bearing a load. Now, we know that we're on a situation where we're almost on brownouts. Some areas it's quite tight margin. So National Grid are looking at developing that. I'm just interested in how hydrogen is going to play its part with microgeneration, feeding in with CHP systems and microgeneration into the system, and what part the National Grid see as far as you're concerned.
I can't speak on behalf of National Grid because I'm not there, but there's a key difference between sort of individual household scale micro CHP with fuel cells as with residential solar panels. In the CHP is typically producing electricity at the times of highest demand. It'll be in the day and more often in winter than in summer. So it actually helps stabilize the local distribution system. It'll improve problems of voltage and frequency. And so you've also got the option of remote sort of semi-control of these. So National Grid, for example, could lash together 1 million of these fuel cells across the country and remotely program it to say, could you all be coming on at 5 p.m. please to help with the evening peak? Could you all make sure you shut off at midday when solar output's at its highest? And so you don't have the benefits of, say, a combustion turbine with spinning metals so that you've got the inertia on the system to help slow down the rate of change of everything. But you have got a controllable and flexible resource. So it can help with local distribution grid issues. It can help with national margin tightness issues as well. In Japan, they've now got nearly 200,000 of these, so they're only small units. That's only about 200 megawatts of capacity, but they're planning to have 5 million within 15 years. So that would give them basically the capacity that they lost with the Fukushima reactor, which would be very helpful in a very energy-tight country like Japan.
I saw one more question, and then we're going to move on. This lady here. Would you like to just use and tell us who you are?
Okay, Michaela Kendall from Adelan. Thank you. Thanks very much for your talk. My question's really about industrial and private investment into the hydrogen and fuel cell area. Do you think that it's going to be publicly stimulated or privately stimulated? And is there any quantification of the investment in the UK coming from private industry? Just one thing, we've just formed the fuel cells and hydrogen network in the Midlands, and that pressure has really come from industry, I think. There's so many people that are active in hydrogen with deployment projects, demonstration projects. So
Yes.
there seems to be quite a significant investment.
So that's another example of a local area trying to take a lead over and above what the national government is doing. So in terms of public versus private, I can't say a huge amount because I don't think I quantified that aspect. But you can see in other countries that the government provides the sort of the foundation. They provide a consistent vision, say, for targets for 2020, for 2025. At least you then know, the companies and the investors then know the direction of travel. And they know that this is something that we're going to be committed to. Other countries have got funds of 100 million for transport, for example, whereas we have 2. I don't think all of the money really has to come from government and ever really will. But if the government can provide a bit of willing and show a bit of vision, then that will de-risk the industry for the private investors, and they will start to crowd in and more than match that funding. So I can certainly see what you found with it's actually private companies are wanting to push this forward, gather together and speak with a stronger voice as one.